This year marks the 30th anniversary of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and there was another movie that happened just about a year before that also took place in the Big Apple. This week we're talking about Jason versus Casey Jones. Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Brian J. This is Horror Reanimated. Welcome back. This idea for this episode actually came to me from my friend Jacques Quixote. I'm trying to think of what his Twitter handle is. Big Papa Taroto. He's private, so you probably won't be able to find him. But as I mentioned in the intro, sometimes it's nice just to kick back and mix things that you love. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But I was looking at, after talking about some of these ideas with Jock, and shout out to Jock. He's been an ardent supporter of this show even since its infancy a few months to a year ago. And I appreciate that very much. He's always giving me ideas because he says he's too shy or doesn't have the confidence to do his own podcast. So every once in a while he'll shoot something to me, we'll talk about it, and he'll say, go ahead. And he looks forward to it. So I hope you do look forward to this. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles growing up was one of my favorite movies. I was born in '87, so obviously it was like I was becoming conscious of the world right as the peak of the Ninja Turtle era happened, and coincided with the movies in 1990, and I think the other one was '92, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze, and we don't talk about TMNT 3 because to me that didn't exist. It's just the first one. The second one's barely there, and then the third one's out of my mind. But I'm going to shout out Nuclear Heat Graphics. Shaheen is a friend of Wrestling Soup, a friend of my buddy John from Wrestling Soup, an acquaintance of mine. And I still want to see if he'll commission a piece for this, but he drew, I think it was the Jason Takes Manhattan logo, or I had seen some of his TMNT 90s stuff that he does. He does custom art. So go check out nuclearheatgraphics.com. Oh, and Wrestling Soup, as long as we're getting those plugs in. But does awesome stuff. So he had done some Turtle pieces and some Friday the 13th stuff, and I said, dude, have you ever thought about doing a piece that was, the Casey Jones mask over the Manhattan skyline, like the cover of Jason Takes Manhattan? And I don't think he ever got to it. He's been really busy with other stuff and had some issues, I think flooding in his house or something a few months ago. So I don't think he ever got to it. Not that I was paying him to do it. I just kind of gave him an idea. But it just, ever since then, and I've talked with Jock about this, just the Jason versus Casey Jones thing is really kind of been bubbling beneath the surface. And now I finally have time to explore this stuff. But as I mentioned, Jason Takes Manhattan, probably the low point of the original Paramount run for Jason. Some would argue that, because some find merit in this film. But it was built up that Jason Takes Manhattan. It was going to be this great thing, and then the budget did not allow for a lot of the set pieces and location shooting. So it just kind of got whittled away, piece by piece, and we got the movie that we ended up with. And it's fun. I mean, it's probably peak Kane Hodder as Jason. There's some really visceral kills in there. Some basic but visceral kills, and with the effects, the sound design, the visual design of Jason, it's probably the most ferocious Jason of the Kane Hodder era. And probably the coolest look, too. Most terrifying. That's the one I think of from when I was a kid that I was terrified of. So that movie took place in 1989, and then the franchise was purchased, or at least the rights to make films, was purchased by New Line Cinema soon after that, I want to say. Because Jason Goes to Hell was, I think, 1993. So between 89 and 93, they're trying to make Freddy vs. Jason happen. New Line ended up purchasing at some point, and I should probably have looked that up, purchased the rights for Friday the 13th from Paramount And then that's when the new version of Jason started. So this film, although it would never have happened, and I don't think anyone ever had the idea to do this, unless there was some sort of comic book that I'm not familiar with, could have happened just from a distribution standpoint because there were both New Line properties around this time. So I'm thinking sometime after TMNT 90 and sometime after Jason Goes to Hell. Actually, maybe sometime before TMNT. Maybe that's Casey's backstory. I don't know. But as I mentioned, both New Line, Casey Jones was a tough customer. He was a guy that was kind of the other side of the Turtles coin, if you're not familiar, in the film or the comics. I'm not familiar as much with the comics. I tried to talk to John Draper about that because he's a comic book guy. He was not at all familiar with the movie, and I don't know how closely the movie resembles the comics. But in the film, Casey was a vigilante, and he was punishing. In the movie, you've never seen it. I know it's a 30-year-old movie. Shame on you if you haven't. It's actually much deeper, and it deals with themes of family and kind of the gang resurgence, or gang surge, I guess you could say, of the 80s into the 90s. Kind of that lost youth that was disenfranchised. A lot of Gen X stuff. The youth that was disenfranchised with the baby boomers and turning away from their parents and turning to these other role models in the form of gangs or gang leaders or drug dealers or crime bosses, whatever iteration. But if you look at it, other than just a weird movie about mutant turtles that do kung fu, there is a lot of stuff in there, and there's even some Pinocchio lessons mixed in there with some parallels between, what is it, Fantasy Island? What's the island the boys go to and turn into jackasses? So I mean, there's a lot going on there that's beneath the surface. But at the heart of that is the Turtles and their little family trying to fight for good and fight against crime from the shadows. Casey Jones did the same thing, except he was a little bit more brutal and a little bit more like the Punisher in a way, where we don't know why he does this. We didn't know his backstory or anything, but we know he was an ex-athlete. His weapons were based on sports, so hockey sticks, cricket bats, sometimes golf clubs to comedic lengths, sometimes more serious. But basically, he knew his way around different sporting utensils and used them as weapons. And he was a tough guy. He stayed in shape, and he, like I said, he was very much the darker version of the Turtles. So also comedic, also lighthearted at times, wisecracking. So where maybe the Turtles would be Superman, truth, justice, in the American way, Casey would be more like, I don't even want to say Batman, because Batman was super serious and depressive and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of another, not quite Deadpool, but more serious with some comedic flair. So to me, it just seemed like a natural fit. And if we're just going to role play this here for a second, the end of Jason Takes Manhattan, Jason winds up in New York. He's chasing people around, and he winds up, you'd probably have to retcon this a bit, but at the end of the film, they wind up in the sewers of Manhattan. And the heroes, what's her name? Remy? I think her name is Remy. The survivors, the final girl being Remy, she floods. It's bizarre, but in the movie they just state that every night at a certain time the sewers are flooded with toxic waste, and it's bizarre and it's stupid. But in this case, they used it to wash Jason away, and he drowns, and she has a vision of him reverting back to his childlike state. It's really a bizarre ending, and if I'm taking liberties here, because it is my podcast, I'm allowed to do that, I'd probably retcon that or leave that as like the end of part 2, they don't, the Jason grabbing her underneath is left. Maybe it's a dream. The end of part 3, they cut out, or the beginning of part 3, they cut out the part 2 where Jason jumps through the window and grabs Ginny. That's like dream stuff. So I would assume that was a hallucination by Remy. And maybe it wasn't toxic waste. Maybe it was wastewater or something to that extent, since it was the sewers. But it would make sense to start in the sewers in some way. And if Casey Jones is running around, and if you've never seen him, he wears a hockey mask as well, which is, again, a big part of where this came from. But, how would you put those together? You could probably do, I don't know, it may be a little lazy here. May not be. I'll let you guys be the judge. But before we go forward, if you want to be the judge, or if you have some ideas or some thoughts or critiques or whatever, you feel like just saying hi, you can email me at bshowbrian@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at bshowbrian. And you can follow this show on facebook.com/horror reanimated. So there you go. Leave your feedback there. I'll try to post something about this to discuss on those pages too, just so you can join in, and maybe I'll discuss them next week. Maybe I'll start doing that when people start answering that call to action. I'll just start talking about it the following week. Or I'll post it a week before, and then I'll use it on the discussion. Be proactive, Brian. So it may be lazy. I don't know. You can let me know. But I could... Mistaken identity seems like the easiest way to go. Obviously, there's someone in Manhattan who was thought to have been dead. There's a guy who... there's a ton of people seeing Jason, witnessing Jason walking through the streets of New York. And he attacked the guy at the bar, threw him across the room. He killed some gangbangers in an alley. There's people from the high school, like a whole boat full of people that are dead. Teachers, all sorts of, scattered all around the streets, back alleys, buildings. Storage barrels in some sense. It was the one guy, the principal was drowned in a metal storage barrel. So I think if you got a maniac in a hockey mask walking around killing civilians, when Casey Jones is there and presumably has been there for some time, because 1989 would have been Jason Takes Manhattan. Turtles met with Casey sometime. The film took place in 1990. I don't know if it, they came out in 90. I don't know if it took place during that year. But, a guy like Casey Jones pops up with a hockey mask, and now people are being beaten up but not killed, and there's a lot of crime going on, and there's all these unsolved deaths from this hockey mask killer a year before, 2 years before, maybe even while Casey was still beating up muggers and purse snatchers. Who knows? So to me, that would be the easiest route. Again, maybe lazy, but easy. Or even if the police don't mistake his identity, if as he becomes romantically involved with April, maybe April is attacked by Jason. I don't know. There's a number of ways you could do it. Obviously, the last time we see Jason, he's in the sewers. You could even do something really dark, and you could have Jason stumble into the turtles' hideout and just slaughter all the turtles. And then Casey Jones shows up with a pizza, and there's just limbs and entrails and shit everywhere. And Casey goes crazy, like, what the hell? See, to me, that's where my head goes. So I think it would have been a short-lived partnership. It wouldn't really have been much of a series. Although it would have been cool to see the Turtles trying to... See, there's so much crossover there. I don't know why... All right, I'm going to search to see if there was a Turtles and a Jason comic or something like that. Because you think about it. Jason Crystal Lake, water. The Turtles, obviously water. Turtles versus Jason. Is there anything? No? I mean, there's some fan stuff on YouTube. But there's not really anything... No, I think we got something going here. Turtles, water. Jason, Crystal Lake, water. Jason presumably is left in a sewer to die. The Turtles live in a sewer. The Turtles show up around the same time Jason dies. Then again, the Turtles would have lived in the sewer for a while before that. Because it takes a while to train, and Splinter makes it seem as if they've been there a while. So that'd be an interesting way to go. The Turtles and Splinter slaughtered by Jason Voorhees. The other thing, too, I guess, is in the film they go to April's family's farm. It's an old farmhouse. So I guess after the Turtles defeat the Foot Clan, if you're doing after TMNT 90, I probably should have talked to my buddy James Oblivion about this. He's a fan of both horror and Turtles. He'd have been a really good guy to bounce stuff off. He's a smart dude. So I guess if New Jersey is the setting for Crystal Lake, right? If it is in New Jersey, and the Turtles are in Manhattan, that's not very far. So if they did drive some number of hours to get to April's family's farm, then perhaps it's near Crystal Lake. So you could do that too. Maybe April and Casey go for some... Okay, now it's coming to me. April and Casey go to the lake house, or not lake house, the farm. And perhaps they either go in there to get away after all this stuff happens with Shredder and the Turtles, and they're just trying to be by themselves. You know, April is a reporter and helped bring down this criminal element in New York, which would have been a big deal. So maybe she's trying to escape the heat. Maybe there's a lot of heat on her. She's a marked woman. Marked for death. Sounds like a Steven Seagal movie. I think it is one. But if you took April and Casey and put them there, and then maybe at the lake, or maybe Jason kills April. Maybe Jason kills April and a witness sees a maniac with a hockey mask and a machete or something to that extent murder this woman. And when the police go to the farm and they question Casey, they see a hockey mask sitting there on the table, and they see like leftover weapons from the Turtles, like swords and sais, nunchucks, bows. They see all this stuff. And of course they take him in, or whatever the case. He goes on the run and ends up running into Jason, hides out at an old, he's hiding out, and he finds this campground. And he's scavenging for food, and he finds, stumbles upon Jason, and then they duke it out, almost like Never Hike Alone. I think there's a number of ways you could do it. And both, again, ironically, both films or series center kind of on family. As I alluded to, the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was really very firmly entrenched on the concept of family. Whether it was the Turtles and Splinter as their father, dealing for the first time with the challenge of him not being there. So that the first time they're dealing with the reality that Splinter will not be around forever. It's something that we all have to deal with our parents and our loved ones. So in the middle of all this, Shredder is taking over as a crime boss in New York, essentially. And he's like the Pied Piper. He's gathering all of these disenfranchised youth. Again, as I mentioned, similar to how the gangs operated in New York and in LA and still operate around the country. There's kids looking for acceptance and belonging, and they are brought in by this shepherd of misfits, and he's manipulating them to do his bidding because they think that all of these. Let me backtrack here. There's a cool couple parts of the movie where they show a warehouse, and it's stocked with arcade games. I mean, remember, this is 1990. So the arcade units and musical instruments, and there's basketball hoops, and there's a skate park, and the kids are smoking cigarettes and playing cards. Again, it's a lot like there's a Pleasure Island. That's what it is from Pinocchio. There's all these kids, and they're taking part in all this stuff, and then they end up being, they turn into donkeys, and then they're shipped off as slaves. This is very similar to that, and I want to talk to my brother Steve about this. Just don't know how to do it with the setup we've got now. But no, he brings them in. He spoils them with all these things, and you can do whatever you want. But this is I'm your father, and this is your family, and this is what we do as a family. And he gets them to steal for him, and spy for him, and fight for him. It's a manipulative, abusive relationship, and it deals a lot with family. Much like, as I mentioned on the last episode about Friday the 13th Part 5, is that film, the Friday the 13th franchise, it's all about family. Jason is the son who died. Pamela is avenging his death, or not avenging, but taking her revenge and taking it out on people because she's a lunatic. Then you have Jason, who witnesses his mom being killed, and then he is taking his revenge out on other people because of that. So it has a lot to do with it. And then Part 5, this is where it all came to pass, was Roy killing for his son, Joey, who died in Part 5. So both films have a lot of elements about them that could be used to cross over. But Casey as a badass versus Jason just sounds awesome. How would, again, trying to think of how else you could work that, because it's only 23 minutes in and I've already blown through a couple scenarios. I would... see, now that leads me, we mentioned the mistaken identity. Then I guess it could be a little bit like Part 6, where they had Tommy in jail, and then Jason's still out killing. Maybe April... Here's another idea. April's a reporter. One of the top reporters in New York, according to the film. Maybe April is investigating this hockey-masked killer. And she starts to think that it's Casey. And she's digging into the story, so she's investigating. Maybe she goes out to Crystal Lake. Because, in, Jason Takes Manhattan, the kids are coming from Crystal Lake. It's a high school graduation. They get on a boat. Unbeknownst to them, Jason hitches a ride for some reason. And they're the ones on their way to New York City for their high school graduation. They bring Jason along with them. Right? That's how he gets there. That's how this all starts. So if she's looking into the rest of the murders as Casey is arrested, or as Casey goes on the lam as a fugitive, maybe she, as the reporter, is investigating this and getting stonewalled by people back in Crystal Lake, and maybe there's been a media blackout and they won't give them access to the news of the murders of before, and she's got to dig for it. So she goes back to Crystal Lake and she finds Jason has returned, which, again, I don't know if that makes sense, because if Jason's killing people in New York, then why would she find him back in Crystal Lake? Or she leaves New York to investigate. Things keep happening as Casey swears it's Casey swears it's not him. So maybe she uncovers the truth back in Crystal Lake. And then she rushes back to New York because she knows that, Casey is probably on the hook for a lot of this stuff, and there is still a murderer out there. So again, it would be a much darker thing than a much darker subject matter, I guess, than the Turtles. I mean, the original Turtles, if you look at the subtext, is a darker film than one would imagine a kid's film to be. There's a lot more under the surface. This would be a step further. So, the other thing, though, is it could dig into Casey's background, too. Maybe Casey, almost like Batman, maybe Casey had a family member, which is why he does this. Maybe Casey had a family member who was killed by Jason, was a counselor or something at a campground in Crystal Lake, or a Packanack trainee. I'm trying to think of who else were athletes from those shows. Who was Mark, the guy, the Paralympian, the guy in the wheelchair, part 2. That wouldn't make sense because of the hockey mask. But either way, because in Casey's story, he played professional sports for, I think it was a year before being injured. So I don't know, the time frame, maybe 5-6 years before that would have been around the peak of Jason, the original Jason, the Paramount years. Let's see. No, that wouldn't make sense either, because isn't there a jump? Yeah, there's a jump in years. That wouldn't make sense now. My whole thing is blown. Let's look at this timeline now. Okay, so I've never really put a ton of stock into this, because see, this is difficult because technically I forgot. Did not account for the fact that in part 4, Tommy Jarvis is like 12 years old. And then because they couldn't get Corey Feldman to come back full time, by part 6, oh man, let's see. Where's part 5? Yeah, so it's 84. And then let's see. So, okay, part 5 was retconned. It's technically sometime around 92. No, 97. See, this CampBlood.net, it has the official Friday the 13th timeline from Fangoria issue 130. It says, of all the continuing series in existence, only Star Trek seems to be constantly prodded, poked, and analyzed with countless individuals. Yet the Friday the 13th movies have their own specific timeline established by numerous references and hints. Okay. Yeah, see, I don't know. I think you can play with it a little bit because there were films in the middle that were retconned. You could always say that the earlier films happened earlier, even though there's timestamps on the movies. So this is saying that 1999 or 1997 is when Tommy Jarvis went back and resurrected Jason. And that it wasn't until 1999 that Jason went to New York. So this would technically be 9 years, almost 10 years after the events of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And even those events aren't necessarily dated, except you wouldn't expect to find fully operational arcades and things like that in 1999. So, I don't know. We had them around here for a while. All right, so in that case, all we have to do is move the goalpost a little bit. Maybe the turtles are dead, because let's face it, they're turtles. They're mutated, radioactive, mutated turtles, man. They're not going to be around forever. Probably just turn to goo or cancer-ridden vermin after a number of years. So maybe, what's this, 9 years after Part 1, which would have been 1990. So 99, Casey would probably be in his 40s. Because it was hinted that he was in his 30s in the original TMNT. So, okay, so this is making a little bit more sense now. So maybe Casey Jones fights crime still. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's mellowed out. I guess April would still be a reporter. Maybe he's going through some sort of midlife crisis. I don't know. They didn't seem like the kid having type, so maybe they're still just doing their own thing. I guess that would make sense. But if they're older and they're detached from the Turtles, I guess it wouldn't be a Turtles movie then. So Casey versus Jason would make sense. But I guess Casey, if he had been fighting crime with the Turtles, obviously the police would have some knowledge of him, or at least a hockey-masked person fighting crime, vigilante style. So yeah, the whole timeline thing is screwed up. I would still say it would make most sense to just assume that Part 8 happens in 1990 or 1989, and that the Turtles are there in 1990. But in this case, it would make sense too if they were older, because then you wouldn't have to deal with the Turtles, and maybe it would be some sort of midlife crisis type thing. Maybe we know, obviously, but maybe April doesn't know. Maybe he's been acting really weird. Maybe he's having some problems. Maybe you, as I mentioned with the Jesse's Revenge episode I did a couple months ago, maybe this is an opportunity to dig a little bit into the character of Casey Jones, almost like, in a way, the Joker did with the DC universe. It was not a superhero film. It was not a traditional Joker film. It was a character film about, I don't even remember his name, but the guy who became the Joker. So in this way, it would be more focused on Casey Jones and what makes him tick and where he's at while all this happens. So, maybe they're older and maybe they just need to get away, as adults do. And yeah, maybe they go back to the farm. So if it is in 1990, then maybe Jason's not in Manhattan. Maybe they go to the farm and they need to get away, and the farm is near Crystal Lake. And much like Part 3, maybe it's one of the places Jason hides out at. I don't know. Or maybe Jason wasn't resurrected, and then now they go back sometime later in the mid-90s when Jason has been resurrected by Tommy Jarvis. And it's a place they've always gone. It's the family farm. And maybe that's the place they're going to retire to. So they're fixing things up and run across this character. Maybe they have some sort of big shindig out there. And that's how you get the Friday the 13th style deal where, and again, you can go a number of ways with this, but maybe, I don't know, maybe, what's his name? Casey and April host some big family reunion out there. Or maybe there's some sort of couples retreat or something. That would be like a 90s rom-com gone wrong. Maybe she's dragging Casey to this big couples thing, and it's, unbeknownst to him, this therapy session. And it goes from, because maybe their relationship's on the rocks. Two very strong personalities, the Han Solo, Princess Leia dynamic, for sure. And maybe she drags him out there. And it's a sort of, can we survive this relationship thing? And it turns into, can we survive this weekend type thing? And then, maybe Jason shows up because he's been resurrected, and they're out hiking something and get his attention. So now he follows them back. I don't know. That's interesting now too. See, because I was always, whenever I thought about it, I was thinking of Jason versus Casey, because of the New York connection, the sewer connection. But this could have even gone back further. And if you did a series of films, maybe that would make sense too now, is if they had some sort of interaction with him at the farm years prior, and then he shows up in New York later on, just coincidentally. Because why would he have any reason to think they live in New York? Jason, at that point, his MO has always been Crystal Lake. So maybe it's, you do this film, and it takes place in the 80s, when they're young. Jason's around, and then later on, after they're a little bit older, the Turtles are gone out of the picture. Maybe Jason winds up in New York. And then you throw Kevin McAllister in there. It's a big... No, I'm joking. But, yeah, so maybe then he shows up later on. And then the past catches up with Casey. And then he ends up... Because maybe April is digging in, trying to figure out who this is, or she'd been doing this. And then maybe the police... Oh, that's another thing. Okay. April had not made a fan of... made herself... Let me say this right. April had not ingratiated herself to City Hall. In the first movie, and even in the second one, she butts heads as a journalist, often will do, with the local law enforcement. Oh, pushing for information, follow up on this, follow up on that, and kind of making them look bad. So maybe in this case, Jason goes to New York. He's killing people, because why would he leave New York? If Jason has a ton of people to kill in Crystal, or let me backtrack that again. If Jason has a finite number of people to kill in Crystal Lake, well, now he's got an infinite number of people to kill in Manhattan. So, I don't know how that would exactly work logistically. Would he live in the sewers? But maybe he's there, and while he's killing people, there's, a report of a masked man killing people. So now Chief Stearns, the police officer that April was always butting heads with, always making him look bad, maybe he knows of Casey Jones or this vigilante guy who wears a hockey mask, and he sends his detectives out there, and he puts a special... Because obviously, one of the things that April was pressing Chief Stearns about was that he wasn't doing enough, that he wasn't following up on leads, that he wasn't fulfilling his obligation as the chief to stop the crime and take care of the citizens of New York. So in this case, she would be pushing him, but at the same time, maybe not. Maybe he thinks it's Casey, and maybe he's asking her about it because he knows there's some sort of connection there, but he hasn't been able to figure it all out. So maybe because he's dropped the ball in the past, he puts this task force together because everyone in New York is going crazy. I mean, people are going crazy over the COVID thing. Imagine how crazy they'd be going Son of Sam style, that people wouldn't be going outside. They'd be staying home, and they'd be afraid of their neighbors, much like they were with David Berkowitz on the loose, with Jason going through people, and it's a new serial killer. So now there's a special task force, and there's detectives, and maybe they veer off instead of, because they have no knowledge of the whole Crystal Lake stuff, maybe they get stuck on the train of this masked vigilante who's been operating with impunity in New York City at night. Again, MO is similar. At night, in the shadows, not murdering people, but punishing people. Well, now maybe he's moved to murder. And so then maybe they start trying to tie all these unsolved homicides in the city to Casey Jones. I don't even know if they have his name. And then you see his posters up. So now here's this guy who, for how many years, has been doing good in the city of New York City. He's now enemy number one of the people. So you've got mob justice and people finding him, or people who know who he is, or people he used to run with. Before the Turtles, he was kind of a loner, but I'm sure there was people he used to run with. And you could get into his backstory and his family and all this. So I think there's a number of places you can go, but I didn't even consider April's combative relationship with local law enforcement. And then it's up to April to solve the mystery and Maybe she goes off to Crystal Lake because she's searching news reports about things. And New York is very close to New Jersey. So maybe she finds something. Maybe she sees something about the boat that came from Crystal Lake and the kids that were murdered and the witnesses that saw this. So she ties it back to Crystal Lake, which maybe all the murders are random, except for the initial sightings in whatever year it was, doesn't matter. So maybe the initial ones, those are the only ones that have connections other than just family. So then she traces it back to Crystal Lake. She goes and investigates, comes back to the police with this information. Maybe they think she's making it up. O'Neill, we're going to charge you with accessory if you don't shut up. Keep your mouth shut. So, I don't know. Maybe she goes rogue and steals a camera, and I don't know. That's all getting into the weeds. But man, Casey Jones versus Jason would be a pretty good fight too. Except Jason's Jason, so who knows? You could do if you want to, like an 8 or 10 minute They Live version fight scene with these two. Because to me, that would be the climax of the movie. They tried it with Freddy versus Jason. I don't think Freddy and Jason were right for that. Although I think that's what they were trying to push to. The fight between the two, who would win? I've got a theory about that, but that's for another episode. The Jason versus Casey Jones, to me, that would be the big, that to me, that's the money shot. That's the climax. Is the final, the climax of the whole film is Casey versus Jason. Much like Tommy versus Jason. Much like what was the other one? Not Carrie versus Jason. What's her name? The Tina Shepard versus Jason, the psychic. And you could even do something along the lines of, I don't know, maybe there's another survivor from a past Friday the 13th shows up. Because they see all this stuff going on. It's making national news. So now survivors from the original films may show up in New York and could you imagine them testifying at trial? Doing police lineups with, oh my God, it's so bizarre to think about. But Jason on trial, that actually almost happened. That was was it a Freddy versus Jason pitch? I think it was a Freddy versus Jason pitch where Jason was on trial for his murders. But I think you could do that with Jason and Casey. You could have, maybe they come back and they finally crack this open and they're trying to figure this out. Because let's face it, if a zombie Jason can continue to be operating and cheating death and murdering people years after original death, I think that's not that far a stretch in a universe where 4 baby turtles are mutated and taught ninjutsu. I don't think that's a stretch. I really don't. Or, like I said, forget the whole New York thing. Forget the adult Jason drowns in the subway. Just go back to Crystal Lake. Maybe, as I mentioned, maybe Casey Jones has a relative who is a victim of Jason, so he goes back. Maybe, and again, this is romantic comedy gone wrong type stuff, but maybe April is still living in New York, but maybe she's a national news correspondent or journalist. And she picks up on this story of Jason in the 80s. And she wants to do a national piece on Jason Voorhees in Crystal Lake. So maybe they travel out there. And maybe you retcon episode, I don't know. I'm trying to think, where's that timeline? I got to look at that timeline again. Okay, so this one would make sense within the timeline because according to Fangoria magazine, part 2 takes place in 1984 with Paul opening the Pack and Act Training Center And Tommy, so all four original, I'm sorry, part 2 through part 4 all are supposed to take place in 1984 over one long weekend. In 89, Tina Shepard's dad is killed when she accidentally drops him in the lake. Tommy returns in 92 and resurrects Jason. So, sometime after, if TMNT, the original, takes place in 1990, a couple years after that, 97 would be when Jason was resurrected. So it would still be sometime after that. Jason would be around. So yeah, that would make sense. So maybe after she's more tenured and April becomes a national correspondent, maybe they go out to Forest Green, as it's called now, after he's resurrected. So maybe they go out there to... She goes out to investigate these former murders, and Casey is dragged along with her, and she sells it on like, hey, it'll be a nice weekend. We'll go stay on this lake house that I rented. There's other people going to be there. So it would be, yeah, so maybe her crew's with her, producers and directors and camera people. So maybe the group would be a little bit older. And I'm almost like part 4 where you would have the Jarvis family staying next to a cabin full of people, or part 7 was Tina and her family staying, or her mother and her doctor staying next to this group of teens. Maybe you could do the same thing. And then some weird shit starts happening. April's investigating, and this massacre happens. So maybe part of it happens in Crystal Lake, and then part of it happens in New York. And that would fit within the timeline, too. So maybe April is going to investigate, and all of the people with her end up dying. So then there's these unfortunate circumstances. Her and Casey are the only ones that survive. They escape. And then a couple years later, no one's believing her story. Maybe she's discredited, and maybe she's back working for like a local... maybe she's working for public access or something like that. Damn, see, this shit just... I don't know if it's any good, it just comes to me, but maybe she's been demoted and discredited, and her reputation's ruined. Turtles are long gone. And her and Casey are on the rocks. Maybe he's teaching, high school phys ed or something during the day and still trying to fight criminals at night, but he's getting older, so he's getting... I don't know. No, because you wouldn't want to sell him as a chump. You still want to be a badass. But yeah, so maybe he's got his mojo and she's lost hers, and there's problems. And then now Jason rears his ugly head in New York. And because the police have problems with her, and the massacre that happened to them back in New Jersey was never solved, and no one believed her about Jason, now a hockey mask wearing killer shows up in New York City and starts murdering people in Central Park. So now the one connection, the one realistic connection to both of these things happening is Casey Jones. So yeah, there's a number of ways you could go with that. I think it'd be really fun. Because, all Casey would have to do is break out the golf bag, and he's got the baseball bats and the cricket bats and the hockey sticks and all sorts of shit. Seemed like a tough dude. Took on the Foot. Took on Tatsu. Plus, he would be able to add that wisecracky kind of comedic element. The very thing that people loved Freddy Krueger for. Casey could add that and bring levity to the horror of the story. The horror of the story is. So, I don't know. I think I just think it'd be really tough to meld those two universes, but I think it'd be a fun ride, that's for sure. And again, if you massacre the turtles, I think that'd be fun. Although they were a cash cow at the time, New Line would never have gone for that. So, I don't know. What do you guys think? I always ask you that, but I'm serious. After this ride, this stream of consciousness that was Jason versus Casey Jones, and I'd really like to hear you guys' feedback, and then maybe take another crack at this in a couple months when I've had more of a chance to let this idea marinate. I'd like to revisit some of these. There's no rule saying you can't revisit these and redo episodes down the road, right? But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you have any ideas? How would you put these two universes together? Turtles, or Casey Jones and Jason, or TMNT. I think I hit on a lot of the surface level type stuff that could bring them all together and really work. I just would like to let this marinate, and I'd like to hear you guys' input on it. So email me at bshowbrian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at bshowbrian, on Instagram at bshowbrian, and you can find this show on Facebook at facebook.com/horror reanimated. All one word. And you can always find my podcasts, Horror Reanimated, Wrestling Reanimated, and the occasional B-Show podcast at bshowpodcast.com. Fairly simple. There was one more thing I was going to mention. Oh, Horror History on YouTube. Brian J's Horror History. Go murder that subscribe button. Please, please, please. Hit the notification bell. I just did the Part 5 Black Sheep Friday. That's gotten some good feedback so far. And I think you guys will dig it if you dig this podcast. So go there, let me know. You can also find these episodes. They get automatically uploaded to the YouTube channel Horror History as well. That's kind of the archive for these, because eventually I'll take some of these files down to make room for others as new ones get put up. So you'll always be able to find them there. Again, thanks for hanging out and for joining us on this ride. My name is Brian J, or B Show Brian, depending on how you follow me. And until next time, do whatever you do. Keep watching horror movies. Come up with ideas, and if you have any, send them my way. I'd love to talk about them. This is Horror Reanimated.